Hello, thank you for listening to A Glimpse of the Kingdom. I'm Dr. David Pendergrass. You know, I post things on Twitter oftentimes, and I get responses when you hashtag atheist or atheism and so forth. The other day I got bombarded with, it must have been 20 different responses to something I posted on Twitter at Dr. D. Pendergrass. Anyway, it was a bunch of different comments from probably 3 different atheists. And it was interesting. I wasn't that surprised. It was the same kind of stuff. Some of the posts were very hateful and mean. Some were not hateful and mean. They were just, some were kind of funny. I mean, making fun of me, but I laughed at them. They were kind of funny little quibs. Others were full of random things like, in Genesis it says there's a firmament, but the firmament doesn't exist. That was one of the responses. And yeah, you know, when I see things like that, part of me, I imagine you're already thinking the same thing. I think, of course it doesn't. Of course there's not a firmament. Of course there's not a hard part of creation above us. Therefore, Jesus didn't rise from the dead. I mean, therefore God doesn't exist because the firmament's not real. So I admit it's funny to me. Other things are hurtful because they say hurtful things. I think, man, it's a shame that they can be so mean-spirited. Not all atheists, not all skeptics, not all agnostics are the same. Oh my goodness, they're not. But my point is these could be very hateful. I thought that's a shame. And then I think, you know, it's not totally their fault. I'm trying to give the benefit of the doubt because their mentors, their shepherds, their pastors are people like Richard Dawkins, Sam Harris, Daniel Dennett, Christopher Hitchens, and so forth. And the new atheists, you might call them, who by default are incredibly disdainful of religious people. And we are all lumped together. If I'm a Christian, I'm just religious people, which means I'm in the exact same category as the people who blew up Twin Towers. I'm in the exact same category as KKK. I'm the exact same category of anybody who believes that, to them, is both delusional, stupid, and potentially violent. That's interesting to me, and I'll come back to that in just a second. I want to do another podcast at one point. I saw one of the atheists I clicked on their link and to see previous posts, and they had this picture of this robot from iRobot, the movie with Will Smith, and it said, basically, if these people were enforcing the holy book of the Bible, here's what would happen. And it had 10 commandments, you know, killing people, it's okay to rape and whatever. And it had a bunch of random verses. Of the 10, 8 came from the Old Testament, 2 came from the New Testament. And I thought, I don't fully blame you for being so angry. Because when you read texts like that and assume that that is how we're supposed to interpret those texts, that is to say, if you read these texts that were written 3,000 to 4,000 years ago and think that they still apply to today, it makes sense that you'd be very upset. Now, of course, that's a different podcast. Atheists don't know how to interpret the Bible, but I don't fault them for that. It's just that if you assume that all those ancient texts are still applicable today, it would bother me too. And on top of that, when people bomb the Twin Towers and so forth, I don't fully blame you. You know, Richard Dawkins, the well-known rigorous atheist in the UK, has said many times that 9/11 really was the turning point for him. He finally had had enough, and that's what really was the fire under his rear end, to be so profoundly outspoken against religious people. And so is Richard Dawkins, Christopher Hitchens too. But of course, in debates, people always say, but Richard, not all religious people are the same. But Christopher, not everybody goes and flies planes into the Twin Towers. But it doesn't matter. They're not going to be swayed, and so be it. That if you took their view, if I assume, and I've done this many times in my life, if you look at it, which is very healthy, from the side of a non-believer in any religion, let's say particularly atheists and skeptics and so forth, if you got in their shoes, as it were, and walked a mile in their shoes, and had the views that they had, I understand, to some degree, the vitriol, the profound disdain for religious people. I do. In my book that I wrote, A Skeptic Challenges a Christian, I talk about this in my preface, because I'm trying to address this with people who might be believers who are reading the book. And I'm just going to read a small section out of my book to you about that. And I'm talking about the new atheist, the new version. This new generation of atheists is both the same and different from their predecessors. Their primary complaints are not new at all. Science is the only true mode of knowledge. Believing in God is driven by neurosis, wish fulfillment, or evolutionary needs. Belief in God is for stupid people. You can be moral without God, and so forth. Yet atheists these days are debating in the public square like never before. They're writing popular books that top best-selling lists, and they are most certainly not relegating their debates to philosophical arguments. They can be crass and unrelentingly opposed to all forms of religion. The gloves are off. Religion is poisonous and causes all the wars. It is for the stupid, moronic, delusional, and fairy tale hungry people who are scared of the unknown, or as one scientist put it, scared of the dark. Belief in God stifles every kind of scientific and social progress, and any respect given to religion must be dismissed as the, quote, growing pains of our version of primates, Homo sapiens. Now, remember, most of the vitriol from the new atheists can be attributed to their view that believing in God is like believing in the tooth fairy. How would you feel towards such people? And I'm really asking you this. How would you feel towards people? Really? Imagine a person who vigorously believes in the tooth fairy. Now, you might feel sympathy for the person at first. Maybe they were really unintelligent. They're just too stupid to know the difference. Or maybe they were forced to believe in the tooth fairy because of their family or environment. Okay, but eventually, having to debate tooth fairyists would just frustrate you, especially if you were intellectually arrogant. You would find it profoundly odd that they would gather together each week to sing songs to the tooth fairy and talk to the tooth fairy. On top of that, imagine that you believe tooth fairyists are dangerous and wicked and cause all the wars. Let that sink in. Just know that for most atheists, if you believe in God, talking with you is at least as frustrating as having to talk with the tooth fairyists. A warmongering, delusional, hypocritical, brainwashed, brain-conditioned tooth fairyists. That's what you are in their view. Now, sure, you might meet some nice tooth fairyists now and then, but on the whole, they are to be avoided at all costs, and certainly no respect should be given to them. Well, tooth fairyists, especially the Christian kind, have never been silent, and they give evidence and reasons for it. And of course, many atheists and skeptics don't find their reasons and evidence compelling. My point of this short podcast is simply this. When I see it from their point of view, and this represents what I just read to you in my experience is absolutely the norm, and I know it does not represent every single atheist in the world. That would be a silly idea. But in the norm, this is the norm. And I empathize. Because if I had those views, I would be frustrated. I don't think I'd be as mean as some of them are, like to me on Twitter, but I'm a big boy, I can handle it. My point is, I think I'd have different character there, but of course I don't expect them to be different. If you're an atheist, there's no moral law. What difference does it make if you're mean? Who cares? But in any case, I understand. I do. I would be frustrated too if I were surrounded by people who believe in the tooth fairyist, and on top of that, I just thought I was smarter than they were. Sometimes that kind of ignorance would make me frustrated. So, if you're an atheist, I hear you. I feel you, dog. If you're a Christian, it might help you to think a little bit from their perspective why this vitriol is being cast onto you. Why the disdain? Why the comments on YouTube and Facebook and so forth, sometimes that are so curt or crass or so forth. I'm not talking about good questions. I'm not talking about good, rational conversations. I'm talking about the ones that are not gentle at all. They're rude or curt, and they're demeaning. And if you've looked at all on YouTube, look up any video about anybody about God and look at the YouTube comments, and you'll know what I mean. All I'm saying is, if you see it from their perspective, it makes a little more sense why they'd be so frustrated and ticked off. Now, that's all I'm going to say about that, but I'll end on this. I am convinced there are many really good reasons to believe that a supreme being exists, and that Jesus shows us most clearly what that supreme being is like. I hope you'll read my book if you haven't already. It will tell you exactly why I believe that. If not, God bless you anyway. See you next time. Thank you so much for listening to today's Glimpse of the Kingdom. If you want more theological reflections, go to davidpendergrass.com. If you want me to come out to your church or to help your organization with consulting, go to davidpendergrassconsulting.com.